The city never truly slept, not even at midnight. From Ethan's apartment high above Manhattan, the neon glow of Times Square flickered through half-drawn curtains, casting sharp, fragmented light across the room. The hum of distant traffic and the occasional wail of a siren punctuated the otherwise quiet apartment. He sat on the edge of the sofa, shoulders slumped, phone in hand, staring at the screen as if the simple words could explain the chasm that had suddenly opened between him and Sophia. "You're too needy. I'll choose when we talk." Ethan read it again. The small, unread notification, hovering like a specter in the corner of the screen. He felt the words like a physical weight pressing on his chest. He had always thought that love meant openness, gala, and presence. He had thought that his constant attention, his little gestures, the morning coffee waiting on the counter, the messages during her hectic days, the gentle calls just to hear her voice were signs of devotion. But apparently, to Sophia, it was too much. He tossed the phone lightly onto the glass coffee table, the reflection of the city dancing in the surface. Ethan's jaw tightened. A part of him ached, not just from the sting of rejection, but from a deeper, more dangerous feeling, the fear of losing someone he still loved fiercely, someone he was convinced was worth fighting for. He leaned back, letting the cushions swallow him, eyes tracing the familiar skyline. Lights blinked on buildings like watchful eyes, distant and indifferent. Manhattan had always seemed alive, vibrant, almost sentient, yet now it felt cold. Judging, Ethan's thoughts spiraled. He could call her, he could text back, demanding explanations, spilling the raw ache he felt, but no, he knew better. Impulsive reactions had never served him well. Sophia thrived on control. Confrontation on her terms was a battlefield. He wasn't willing to enter blindly. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the hum of the city fill the spaces between thoughts. He remembered how it had started the first year of marriage, filled with late dinners and whispered promises. The way her laughter had lit up the room like sunlight streaming through a narrow apartment window. He remembered their first fight, trivial, over which film to watch, and how even then he had learned the delicate art of compromise. But something had shifted over the years. Subtle at first. The late-night texts she didn't respond to, her gaze drifting past him at parties, the polite yet distant smiles she offered in public. Ethan opened his eyes again. Focusing on the darkened corners of his apartment, he noticed the half-empty wine glass on the counter, the stack of unopened mail, the faint scent of lavender from the candle he had lit hours ago. Everything was quiet, sterile, almost mocking in its stillness. He needed a plan, not a desperate plan born of panic, but one born of strategy, patience, and subtlety. He would reclaim their connection without giving Sophia the satisfaction of knowing he was reacting to her dismissal. He would act in a way she couldn't anticipate. His fingers brushed the screen of his phone, hovering over the messaging app. He imagined her reading it, expecting him to plead or argue, but instead, he would show restraint. He would show that his attention was not weakness. Controlled power. That in itself might make her reconsider everything she thought she knew about him. Ethan rose and walked to the window. The city sprawled beneath him like an intricate maze. Cars glided along avenues like streams of molten light. The distant laughter from a rooftop party reached him faintly, a reminder that life outside continued. Indifferent to his private torment, he pressed his hand against the glass and took a deep breath. The air felt cooler here. At this height, away from the congested streets below. He liked this view. This perspective, it gave him clarity. For the first time since reading the message, a plan began to form in his mind. Delicate, but deliberate. He would not chase her, not in the way she feared. Instead, he would demonstrate the life he led independent of her whims, a life she could not ignore. He would subtly remind her of the bond they had, of the intimacy they had shared, without ever pleading for it back. He would create situations, encounters, and moments that drew her attention, provoked curiosity, and, perhaps most importantly, forced her to confront her own feelings. Ethan turned from the window, Moving to the kitchen and pouring himself a glass of water, he sipped slowly, listening to the faint hiss of the refrigerator, letting each swallow ground him. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the cocktail of anxiety and determination that had fueled him countless times in business. He was about to enter a different kind of negotiation, one where stakes were measured not in contracts or profits, but in trust, love, and the fragile architecture of a marriage. He picked up the phone again, scrolling past old messages, photos of moments together, a laughing Sophia in a sunlit cafe, a quiet evening reading books side by side, a spontaneous trip to the Hudson River on a misty morning. The memories were bittersweet, a reminder of what had been and what might still be reclaimed. And as he scrolled, Ethan felt a sense of calm settle over him. The sting of her words had not disappeared, but it had transformed into focus, a quiet determination to navigate the chasm she had created. He placed the phone down, letting it rest, unread but ready. Tonight, he would think. Tonight, he would plan. And tomorrow, the first subtle moves would begin. He wouldn't beg for her attention. He wouldn't plead for her affection. He would earn it back, quietly, deliberately, in ways she could not anticipate. As the neon lights of Manhattan flickered in rhythm with his heartbeat, Ethan Carter sat alone, eyes sharp, mind alert, a quiet storm brewing. Behind calm blue eyes. This was no longer about being needy. This was about reclaiming control, love, and perhaps, the respect of the woman who thought she could dictate the terms of their connection. Somewhere across the city, Sophia's phone sat dormant, unaware that a carefully orchestrated plan had already begun. And for Ethan, the night was only the beginning. The first time Ethan met Sophia, she was standing under the soft glow of gallery lights, a glass of white wine balanced effortlessly in one hand, the other gesturing animatedly as she debated a painting's merits with a fellow attendee. Her laughter was sharp, deliberate, commanding attention without demanding it. Ethan, who had come expecting another polite social event, felt a pull he hadn't anticipated. There was something magnetic in the way she moved, in the ease with which she inhabited the space around her. He remembered that night in minute detail, the subtle tilt of her head when she finally noticed him, the way her eyes scanned him briefly before lingering just long enough to invite curiosity. He had introduced himself with calm confidence, carefully modulating the charm that had served him well in boardrooms and business negotiations. Yet with Sophia, he felt the unusual stirrings of vulnerability, a sense that here, in her presence, he was not entirely in control. Their courtship unfolded like a cinematic montage of rooftop dinners, late-night drives through the Upper West Side, and spontaneous trips to the Hudson River, where the fog clung to the water like a protective veil. Ethan adored the way Sophia's ambition shaped her world, the crisp efficiency of her work emails, the unwavering focus in meetings, the way she navigated social hierarchies with an elegance that masked ruthless calculation. He admired her strength, but also sensed the isolation it created around her, the subtle walls built from years of self-reliance. Ethan, by contrast, was the kind of man who found comfort in attention to detail, in small gestures of care. He remembered leaving notes tucked into her purse, sending mid-morning messages with funny anecdotes, arranging flowers to arrive at her apartment unannounced. To him, these acts were expressions of love. To Sophia, they sometimes felt intrusive, a gentle irritation masked by her polite smiles. She would often joke, half seriously, "You really think I need all this attention?" These early tensions, though minor, foreshadowed the challenges ahead. Ethan's natural inclination to nurture clashed subtly with Sophia's fiercely independent nature. He adored her for her strength. Yet occasionally that same strength provoked insecurities he hadn't known existed. He wrestled silently with the question, how much closeness is too much? How much freedom is too little? Despite these undercurrents, passion was undeniable. There were nights when the city seemed to shrink to the space between them, the skyscrapers looming like silent witnesses to their intimacy. A shared glance over candlelit dinners could ignite hours of conversation, laughter, and whispered confessions. Ethan found joy in these moments. But he also learned to read the boundaries that Sophia quietly established, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the almost imperceptible glance toward the door, a hand brushing at her hair to signal retreat. He learned that love with Sophia required patience, observation, and careful balance. The couple's lifestyle only intensified the pressures and contrast between them. Manhattan offered glamour, from charity galas and penthouse suites to soirees at art openings and exclusive restaurants. They moved seamlessly through the city's social circles, admired by peers for their power, couple persona. Yet behind the carefully curated Instagram posts and the sparkling smiles at public events, tension simmered. Ethan noticed that Sophia often prioritized appearances, her ambition demanding perfection in every aspect of life. He struggled with feeling both proud and invisible. Proud of her achievements, yet invisible in the spaces where her attention shifted away. Even their home reflected these dynamics. Their apartment, perched on the 20th floor of a sleek, glass-encased building, was both sanctuary and arena. The living room was immaculate, furniture arranged with exacting precision, a place of curated elegance rather than casual comfort. Ethan often lingered in the kitchen after dinner, leaving little notes or preparing small desserts, hoping to draw her into shared moments. Sophia, juggling calls and emails, sometimes barely noticed, a faint smile acknowledging his effort without breaking from her focus. It was during one such evening that Ethan first felt the sting of frustration masked by admiration. Sophia had spent hours on a conference call, her brow furrowed, voice clipped, yet polished, leaving him waiting with a plate of freshly baked cookies. When she finally joined him, exhausted yet radiant in her tailored dress, he offered the cookies with a hopeful grin. She glanced down, raised an eyebrow, and said lightly, "You always try so hard, don't you? I can manage." You know, her tone was teasing, but Ethan felt the sharp edge beneath the words, a subtle reminder of boundaries that were both respected and resented. These moments defined the rhythm of their relationship: bursts of intimacy, followed by gaps of independence, gestures of care met with gentle rebuffs, love intertwined with quiet friction. Each interaction built a complex mosaic of devotion and frustration, desire and restraint. Ethan, ever attentive, learned to navigate these intricacies, internalizing the delicate balance between closeness and distance. By the time they married, the dance had become instinctive. He understood when to push, when to pause, and when to allow silence to speak. Yet even as he embraced this rhythm, small cracks persisted, tiny reminders that Sophia's world was vast, demanding, and often impervious to his efforts. He had always known that winning her heart required more than charm or gifts. It required insight, patience, and a willingness to confront not just her boundaries, but his own fears and insecurities. And as Ethan sat alone in the dimly lit apartment now, staring at her unread message from earlier that night, those early memories surged back, not as warmth, but as a roadmap: the laughter, the debates, the gentle tensions. They were all pieces of a puzzle he was determined to solve. He could feel the old pull of strategy and observation, the quiet patience that had allowed him to navigate Sophia's ambitions and independence in the past. He realized then that the challenge ahead wasn't merely winning her attention, it was winning back the respect and emotional intimacy that had slipped through cracks formed years ago. And as the city lights flickered against the window pane, Ethan Carter felt a familiar determination. Ignite, he would find a way, subtle and calculated, to remind Sophia of the connection they once shared and perhaps uncover new depths in their love that neither had anticipated. The echoes of the beginning whispered in his mind, a steady reminder that love, in all its complexity, was as much about understanding and strategy as it was about passion. Ethan noticed the first subtle change almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a dramatic argument or a public outburst. It was the way Sophia's fingers lingered a little too long over her phone, the slight tension in her shoulders when he approached her in the kitchen, the quiet hesitation before answering his questions. Small things, minor, Yet, in the quiet of their apartment, small things had a way of growing into a storm. It began with canceled plans. A dinner he had carefully arranged at a rooftop restaurant overlooking the Hudson, meant to celebrate a successful quarter, was brushed off with a curt, "Something came up. Ethan, I'll make it up to you." Her tone was polite but distant, her eyes darting to the side as if she were rehearsing an excuse. She didn't quite believe herself. Ethan felt a twinge of irritation, quickly tempered by the awareness that confrontation now would only push her further away. Then came the vague excuses. A late night at work here, a sudden meeting there. The consistency of her explanations was too smooth, too rehearsed. Ethan noticed that when she spoke, her eyes sometimes failed to meet his batted. There was a subtle shift in the cadence of her voice, the placement of her hands, the angle of her posture, subconscious signs that something in the delicate balance of their relationship had shifted. Ethan did not panic. He had learned over the years that rushing to judgment often revealed weakness, and Sophia, ambitious and discerning, would seize upon any display of insecurity. Instead, he observed, quietly cataloging details, the times she left early from events, the unexplained late-night texts, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume she tried unsuccessfully to mask. He noted patterns, not proof, but enough to trigger a gnawing sense of unease. The tension in the apartment grew like a low hum beneath their conversations. Words were exchanged, polite and casual, but the air between them had changed. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, from the mundane to the extreme, yet his face betrayed nothing. He mastered the art of neutral composure, a mask perfected over years of corporate negotiations and high-stakes interactions. It was during one particularly quiet evening that the unease crystallized. Sophia had promised a simple dinner at home, of a return to the intimacy they both craved after a week of social obligations. Ethan prepared the table with care, selecting her favorite wine, lighting candles, arranging the plates with precise elegance. He smiled when she entered, a small gesture of hope and warmth. But her smile was polite, distracted. Her eyes flitted briefly to the phone on the counter, a glance so fleeting he could have missed it if he weren't attuned to every nuance. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she murmured. "I have to step out for a quick meeting. It's urgent." The hesitation in her voice was slight but unmistakable. He nodded, swallowing the knot of disappointment in his throat. "Of course," he said evenly, forcing warmth into the words. "I hope it goes well." Once she left, the apartment felt suddenly vast and hollow. The candlelight flickered across the polished surfaces, reflecting fragments of a life that seemed increasingly distant. Ethan poured himself a drink, sat by the window, and stared at the city lights sprawling below. Manhattan, brilliant and indifferent, mirrored the complexity of his emotions. Beautiful, dazzling, yet fraught with shadows. He replayed their interactions in his mind, a lunch she had attended with a former colleague, claiming it was work-related, the laughter in her texts, sent to him late at night, carefully neutral but too polished to be casual, the occasional mention of plans that never aligned with his own calendar. Each fragment alone was negligible. Together, they painted a picture that Ethan could not ignore. And yet, he restrained himself from accusation. He understood the power of subtlety. To confront Sophia prematurely could unravel the delicate threads that still connected them. Instead, he began to strategize, mapping out not just her movements, but the emotional currents beneath her words. He considered the psychology of attention and desire, the ways in which absence could heighten longing, and presence could provoke resentment. He realized that the key was not to chase her, but to remain a quiet, compelling presence, a constant undercurrent she could not dismiss. Ethan's worry was accompanied by a strange exhilaration. There was an almost cinematic quality to the tension, the delicate dance of trust and suspicion, of observation and restraint. He moved through their apartment like a shadow, noting details he had never consciously registered before: the slight crease in the throw pillow where she sat each morning, the way her coat lingered longer on the rack than it should, The subtle shift in her tone when speaking to mutual friends, every small clue was a brushstroke in a larger, complex portrait of intimacy fraying at the edges. Late that night, he sat at his desk, journal open, pen poised. He cataloged observations, not accusations, writing them as facts, noting the times, gestures, and patterns. This was not about control. It was about awareness. He reminded himself that love was nuanced and that every relationship had its ebbs and flows, but there was a growing weight in his chest that demanded recognition. Yet, even amidst the unease, Ethan maintained a thread of optimism. He remembered the early days, their laughter, shared silences, the intimacy that had felt effortless. He reminded himself that connection could be rekindled, that attention and patience, wielded correctly, he could turn suspicion into curiosity, distance into desire. He would not allow fear to dictate his actions. Instead, he would navigate the maze with precision, observing, waiting, and planning the subtle moves that might draw Sophia closer, or at least reveal the truth. As the city lights pulsed through the apartment, Ethan took a deep breath. His face remained calm, unreadable. But inside, a quiet storm brewed. The tension, the subtle betrayals, the hidden meetings, all of it demanded strategy, not confrontation. He would wait, watch, and act deliberately, and when the moment came, it would not be reactive. It would be intentional, precise, and unforgettable. In the shadows of the glittering city, Ethan Carter sat poised, aware, and resolute. The game had begun, and he was determined to play it with every ounce of patience, intelligence, and subtlety he possessed. The next move, though uncertain, would be his alone to make. The city outside Ethan's window pulsed with relentless energy. Oblivious to the turmoil brewing in the quiet sanctuary of his apartment, Manhattan had always seemed alive, vibrant, almost indifferent, but tonight, every flickering neon sign, every distant honk of a taxi, felt like a stark reminder of the chaos creeping into his personal life. Ethan sat at his desk, the soft glow of his laptop casting angular shadows across his face. He had discovered something earlier that day, something he couldn't ignore. A series of messages, accidentally left logged in her work email on a shared tablet. Innocuous at first glance, professional in tone, but subtle intimacies threaded between the lines, late-night meetings. Compliments that lingered longer than necessary. A casual familiarity that made Ethan's stomach tighten. It was enough to ignite a cold, creeping fear, the type that settled deep in the chest and refused to be shaken. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, hands pressed to his temples. The realization struck like a double-edged sword. He could confront Sophia now, demand explanations, force the truth into the open, and risk shattering whatever fragile equilibrium remained. Or he could wait, observe, and craft a plan that might reveal more than he could glean from a direct confrontation. Patience had always been his ally, and yet, the stakes now were intensely personal. He thought about the countless nights spent together, the intimacy, the laughter, the unspoken promises that had woven the fabric of their marriage. Pride wrestled with love. Fear of loss gnawed at him. How could he reconcile the woman he adored with the possibility of betrayal? His mind flickered through scenarios, a confrontation that ended in anger, tears that would neither heal nor clarify, words spoken in haste that could never be taken back. Yet, beneath the anxiety, a strategic clarity emerged. Ethan realized that to act impulsively would be to surrender control, the very thing Sophia seemed to crave in the relationship. Instead, he would move subtly, like a chess player observing the board, anticipating each response, each misstep, each hint of vulnerability. He needed to understand the extent of the emotional distance, the truth behind her interactions. Without revealing the depth of his own suspicions, he replayed the moments that had seemed innocuous. The canceled dinner at the rooftop restaurant, the late-night texts, The vague excuses for sudden work emergencies, each one was now tinted with possibility. And yet, Ethan's mind refused to leap to conclusions without evidence. He was acutely aware that suspicion could poison intimacy, and he could not allow fear alone to dictate his actions. Ethan's apartment felt simultaneously too small and too large. The familiar furniture, the polished glass tables, the carefully arranged art pieces, the soft glow of the floor, lamps suddenly seemed like props in a drama, where he was both protagonist and detective. He moved slowly through the rooms, tracing the familiar lines, noting the details, the faint scent of her perfume lingering near the kitchen, the subtle indentation on the sofa, where she often sat reading emails, the soft hum of the refrigerator that had become a metronome for his thoughts. He opened the tablet again, reviewing the messages, analyzing tone, timing, and context. There was no outright declaration of infidelity, no explicit betrayal, but there was a subtle intimacy, a connection that was not his. Ethan felt a bitter cocktail of emotions: hurt, jealousy, fear. But beneath it all, a simmering resolve. He would not confront blindly. He would observe, understand, and then act in a manner that revealed both the truth and his own strength. Hours passed. Ethan remained perched at his desk, drinking coffee he barely tasted, his mind replaying scenarios and responses. He imagined conversations with Sophia, weighing words that could elicit honesty against words that might provoke defensiveness. He considered the consequences of inaction, the consequences of impatience, the delicate balance between suspicion and proof. Each decision was a test of patience and intellect, a challenge to navigate emotions without succumbing to them. The tension within him was palpable, a silent drumbeat echoing in his chest. He thought about the early days of their marriage, the courtship that had been filled with playful debates, laughter, and mutual admiration. That connection had not disappeared. It had shifted, distorted under the weight of ambition, routine, and subtle miscommunications. Ethan understood that what he was facing was not simply a potential betrayal. It was the unraveling of trust, the delicate threads that bound two people together over years of intimacy. He closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Shadows danced across the room, cast by the flickering city lights outside. He imagined Sophia's perspective, a woman of ambition, accustomed to controlling outcomes, navigating social and professional currents with precision. Would she recognize the effect her actions were having? Did she even realize the tension that had grown between them? Quiet and persistent, Ethan felt a pang of fear, but it was tempered by clarity. The turning point had arrived, not in confrontation, but in awareness. He knew he had a choice: expose her, risk the rupture, or wield patience as a quiet weapon, allowing truth and emotion to surface naturally. And in that moment, he resolved to do neither impulsively. He would wait. He would watch. He would plan. As the night deepened, the city's hum softened into distant murmurs, and Ethan remained awake, poised between vigilance and restraint. The weight of pride, love, and fear of loss pressed against him. Yet within it, a singular focus crystallized: understanding the truth, preserving dignity, and reclaiming the connection that had always defined his relationship with Sophia. Somewhere across Manhattan, Sophia's world continued, unaware of the quiet storm gathering in her absence. Ethan Carter, seated in the dim glow of his apartment, I felt the first true pulse of determination. He would navigate this turning point with precision, and when the moment to act arrived, it would not be a reaction. It would be deliberate, controlled, and irrevocable. The balance of love, trust, and power had shifted, and Ethan, finally, was ready to engage it fully. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, each facet refracting the soft golden light onto the faces of Manhattan's elite. Waiters in crisp black uniforms glided between tables, carrying trays of champagne flutes that caught the gleam of the ceiling lights. The air was rich with perfume, expensive cologne, and the faint hum of hushed conversations interlaced with occasional laughter, Ethan stood near the edge of the room, observing, letting the social currents wash over him without letting them touch his composed exterior. Tonight was not just another gala. It was an event Sophia had insisted upon attending, a showcase of her professional influence and social network. Ethan's presence was expected, but he felt oddly detached, a quiet observer rather than an engaged participant. Every carefully curated smile, every practiced gesture of grace from the guests, seemed distant compared to the tension coiling inside him. He had noticed subtle shifts earlier in the evening. Sophia had arrived with a radiant smile, the sort that commanded attention without effort. Yet her eyes had darted nervously toward certain corners of the room. A hand lingered over her phone for just a second too long. A laugh, a fraction too rehearsed, and a glance exchanged with a man across the room. A man Ethan had seen mentioned fleetingly in the messages he had discovered days ago. Ethan allowed a controlled tightening of his jaw, but he did not approach. He did not confront. Instead, he did something far subtler. He became the shadow within the room, the quiet presence that suggested confidence, composure, and independence. He moved among the guests with effortless charm, engaging briefly with acquaintances, laughing lightly at jokes, but never overextending. His attention seemed equally distributed, not solely focused on Sophia, which subtly shifted the atmosphere around her. Then it happened, the inadvertent reveal. A colleague, unaware of the nuances Ethan had already pieced together, mentioned Sophia's recent collaboration on a late-night creative project with her former colleague. The comment, casual and careless, carried the weight of revelation. Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a micro-expression Ethan noticed instantly. She glanced at him, a flash of apprehension crossing her carefully maintained composure. Ethan's heart tightened, not with rage, but with a complex blend of hurt, clarity, and the unmistakable pang of betrayal. The words confirmed what he had long suspected: there had been emotional distance, perhaps more. And now the veil had lifted, not through confrontation, but through careless truth. Yet he remained silent. No accusatory words passed his lips. No dramatic gesture betrayed the storm within. Instead, he smiled lightly, the perfect blend of poise and detachment, and raised his glass in a small, courteous toast to a passing acquaintance. His calm, controlled demeanor shifted the power dynamic without a single overt action. Where Sophia might have expected anger, confrontation, or emotional unraveling, she found instead a composed, independent Ethan. An Ethan untethered from immediate reaction, yet fully aware. As the evening progressed, Ethan continued to navigate the social terrain with subtle mastery. He engaged in meaningful conversation with other guests, laughed at clever anecdotes, and allowed his presence to be noticed without seeking to dominate. Every interaction was a quiet statement. He was more than a partner defined by her whims. He was a person of depth, patience, and self-possession. Sophia, meanwhile, seemed increasingly aware of the shift. Her posture stiffened slightly, a hand briefly clutching her glass, eyes flicking toward Ethan as if recalculating the terrain of their relationship. The man across the room, the one whose name had surfaced in those subtle messages, was present, but Ethan did not confront him, did not seek drama. He let observation and controlled poise speak volumes. A delicate dance unfolded. Each glance exchanged between Ethan and Sophia carried meaning layered beneath the surface: hurt, accusation, recognition, and the silent acknowledgement of a power imbalance that had quietly realigned. In that crowded, glittering room, surrounded by the hum of social performance, the most significant action was the one that required no words at all. By the end of the evening, Sophia approached him privately, ostensibly to comment on a shared acquaintance's latest success. Ethan listened, facial expression neutral, eyes steady, voice calm but deliberate. The subtlety of his response, the absence of panic or reproach, spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Sophia realized, perhaps for the first time in months, that her actions, her secrets, and the emotional distance she had cultivated had consequences beyond immediate perception. Ethan's strategy was clear. Independence and emotional control were far more powerful than accusation. By refusing to react impulsively, by demonstrating composure and subtle confidence, he reclaimed authority in the relationship without diminishing his integrity or emotional depth. The lesson, unspoken yet unmistakable, was one Sophia could not ignore. The connection between them was not hers to dictate entirely, and emotional games could not sway him when patience and awareness guided his steps. As the gala wound down, the guests dispersed into the Manhattan night, the city lights reflecting against rain-slicked streets below. Ethan and Sophia walked side by side in near silence. Neither spoke of the inadvertent revelation, yet the shift in atmosphere was tangible. Sophia's mind buzzed with unspoken thoughts, while Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction not in triumph, but in clarity, in control, and in the subtle reclamation of balance within their complex relationship. In that moment, Ethan understood something vital: betrayal, whether through action or emotional distance, could not break him. The power lay not in exposing secrets immediately, but in demonstrating patience, resilience, and self-possession. Sophia had glimpsed the depth of his quiet strategy, and that awareness alone began to tilt the scales in ways that words could never achieve. And as they returned to their apartment, the city stretching endlessly beneath them, Ethan Carter felt a calm certainty settle over him. The turning point had passed, the veil lifted, and the subtle, intricate game of trust, power, and intimacy had taken a decisive, if quiet, step forward. The night was not about confrontation. It was about presence, control, and the quiet strength that would guide the chapters yet to come. The morning after the gala, Manhattan hummed with its usual rhythm. The streets were alive with honking taxis, joggers weaving through traffic, and the distant hum of construction, a relentless soundtrack to the city that never paused. Inside their apartment, however, a different kind of energy lingered. Quieter, but no less potent. The air between Ethan and Sophia was thick, filled with unsaid words, super glance, and the faint tension of boundaries redrawn. Sophia sat at the breakfast table, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Her mind replayed the previous night, each interaction under the chandeliers, each careful smile, each fleeting glance. Ethan's composure, his refusal to confront, to accuse, to unravel publicly, it had thrown her off balance in a way she hadn't anticipated. The man who had once seemed attentive, even clingy, had transformed in a single evening into a figure of quiet power. She felt exposed, as if the carefully constructed walls she had relied upon were now transparent to his observation. Ethan entered the kitchen moments later, dressed casually, his expression calm but deliberate. There was no accusation in his eyes, no overt scrutiny. Yet Sophia felt the weight of his presence more keenly than any confrontation could have conveyed. He poured himself a glass of water and took a slow sip, exuding a quiet self-possession that contrasted sharply with the social performance of the night before. "Morning," he said simply, voice neutrale, warm but measured. "Morning," Sophia replied. Her tone slightly strained. She avoided his eyes, focusing instead on the swirling coffee in her cup, the condensation forming on the glass of water beside her. The silence stretched, comfortable to an outsider, but laden with tension for them both. Ethan's strategy of withdrawal, remaining present without reaction, created an invisible pressure. He was still there, engaged in the rhythms of domestic life, yet untethered from the emotional sway of her actions. This quiet independence, combined with his composed demeanor, forced Sophia into reflection. She could not rely on drama or guilt to manipulate attention or affection. She had glimpsed, perhaps for the first time, that his love was not passive. It was deliberate, observant, and guided by internal standards rather than external behavior. Friends and colleagues soon began to notice subtle shifts as well. At work, whispers circulated about Ethan's calm presence at the gala. His ability to navigate social interactions without seeking approval or reacting impulsively, Sophia caught the occasional glance, a flicker of curiosity or admiration, and realized that public perception had begun to complicate private turmoil. The narrative of their relationship, previously confined to intimate interactions, was now observed, judged, and subtly reshaped by external eyes. This social scrutiny added another layer to the quiet fallout. Every choice, every gesture, now carried weight beyond their apartment walls. For Sophia, the realization was unsettling. She had relied on control and perception in public spaces. Now she faced a partner who could command attention without demanding it, who could influence perception through presence alone. The subtle recalibration of power left her both anxious and intrigued. Ethan, for his part, navigated the aftermath with deliberate patience. He maintained dignity in every interaction. Neither retreating into detachment nor pursuing confrontation, he recognized the importance of subtlety, understanding that immediate reaction could destabilize the fragile equilibrium further. His attention to detail extended beyond observation. He noted her patterns, her hesitations, and the way she adjusted to the new dynamic between them. They found themselves alone in moments of quiet reflection, shared silences on the sofa, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the city's distant pulse. Each was forced to confront hidden truths, the unspoken desires, the insecurities, the compromises made silently over years of togetherness, personal boundaries, previously assumed or untested, now demanded recognition. Ethan understood his own tolerance, his own need for respect and emotional reciprocity. Sophia, in turn, recognized the limits of her independence and the subtle, undeniable force of a partner who could wield patience as power. These reflections were not dramatic. They were slow, deliberate, and deeply internal. Ethan's withdrawal did not remove him from her life. Instead, it emphasized his presence through contrast. Where she had expected reactions, anger, pleading, visible hurt, she found composure, quiet dignity, and unwavering self-possession. This realization unsettled her, forcing introspection. She could no longer ignore the consequences of emotional distance or clandestine connections. In the following days, their interactions were punctuated by small gestures, a shared cup of coffee, an exchanged glance across a crowded room, a gentle nod in passing, nothing overt, nothing demanding. And yet, the impact of these gestures was profound. They communicated presence, observation, and restrained a language beyond words. Sophia began to recalibrate her understanding of intimacy, trust, and the consequences of unspoken choices. Ethan, too, reflected deeply. The fallout was not just about betrayal or suspicion. It was about the boundaries of love, the interplay of control and surrender, and the intricate architecture of a relationship tested by human imperfection. He recognized the power of measured response, of demonstrating independence without detachment, and the subtle ways in which presence could command attention more effectively than confrontation. By the end of the week, a new rhythm had begun to emerge. Social perception had shifted, private tensions had simmered into awareness, and both partners were navigating an intricate landscape of emotional truth. The fallout had exposed vulnerabilities, clarified priorities, and revealed that quiet resilience could be more compelling than dramatic reaction. In the solitude of his apartment one evening, Ethan stared out at the glowing skyline. The city stretched endlessly before him, indifferent, yet infinitely layered, much like the human heart. He felt the weight of the week, the subtle betrayals, the careful strategy, the recalibration of intimacy, but he also felt clarity. He understood, with precise and deliberate certainty, that control, patience, and dignity were now his allies in navigating a relationship transformed by truth. Across the room, Sophia moved quietly, pausing to glance at him briefly before returning to her work. Her expression was thoughtful, uncertain, yet tinged with recognition. In the aftermath of revelation and subtle confrontation, both were forced to examine themselves and each other with unprecedented honesty. The city's hum persisted outside, a constant reminder that life moved forward, indifferent to private complexities. Yet, within the apartment, a new understanding had begun to take shape, a quiet recalibration of power, intimacy, and the boundaries that define them. The fallout was not a rupture, nor a reconciliation. It was something subtler, more profound, a reshaping of awareness, a realignment of expectations, and the beginning of a careful, deliberate navigation of trust, respect, and desire. And in that quiet, suspended space, Ethan Carter and Sophia both understood love, like the city around them, was not static. It was constantly evolving, shaped by presence, perception, and the choices made in moments when nothing seemed to happen at all, but everything had shifted. The late afternoon light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan apartment, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, honking cabs, distanciera, the murmur of life pressing on. Inside, the apartment was calm, almost suspended in time, yet charged with the gravity of unspoken truths. Sophia stood near the window, hands clasped in front of her, fingers twisting nervously. Her usually impeccable composure had faltered over the past days, and tonight, she finally summoned the courage to confront not just Ethan, but herself. She had rehearsed the words countless times in her mind, but standing before him now, she realized that rehearsal could not capture the rawness of vulnerability. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft, almost tentative. I need to talk to you. About everything. About me. About us." Ethan remained seated on the edge of the sofa, posture relaxed, yet alert, his gaze steady on her. He did not interrupt, did not lean forward. His calm presence created a space that invited honesty, but did not demand it. Sophia took a deep breath, gathering fragments of courage she had long kept hidden. I've been distant," she admitted, eyes tracing the floor for a moment before meeting his. "And I wasn't entirely honest, not because I wanted to hurt you, but because I wasn't fully aware of what I was doing, the late nights, the secret meetings. I didn't realize how far I was drifting, how much I was risking." Ethan listened silently, letting each word settle like a weight in the room. He noted the subtle tremor in her voice, the slight tightness in her shoulders, the way her gaze flickered toward the window before returning to him. These were markers of sincerity, of vulnerability, indicators that Sophia was not simply apologizing, but truly confronting her actions and their consequences. When she paused, he finally spoke, his voice measured, calm, yet imbued with authority. "Sophia, I knew you were drifting before the gala. I noticed the signs, the subtle shifts, the distractions, the absence," he said, each word deliberate, steady. "And I could have confronted you immediately, demanded explanations, made it about punishment. But I didn't. Not because I wanted to ignore it, but because I wanted you to see, to feel the weight of what we were risking. Our connection, our trust, our intimacy, it wasn't something to be taken lightly." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, absorbing the weight of his words. The realization dawned that Ethan's actions had never been about retaliation, his distance, his quiet independence. The subtle recalibration of their dynamic, it had been a strategic lesson in awareness, a demonstration of how love and connection could be jeopardized by neglect and emotional distance. I understand," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "I see it now. I see what I've done and how much I've jeopardized what we had." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the edge of the table, grounding herself. "I'm sorry, Ethan. Truly, I didn't mean to hurt you. I got lost in my ambition, my independence, and I didn't see that I was pulling away from you." Ethan leaned back, his eyes softening slightly, Though his composure remained intact, he could feel the mixture of sorrow, regret, and tentative hope emanating from her. Sophia, it's not just about apology. It's about awareness, about understanding that the choices we make, small or large, carry weight. I wanted you to recognize that without destroying what we have, because love, real love, requires both presence and attention. It requires seeing each other fully, even when it's uncomfortable. A pause filled the room, heavy yet pregnant with possibility. Sophia's gaze fell to the floor again, a quiet admission of shame and vulnerability. Ethan watched, heart steady, acknowledging the sincerity in her posture and tone. The tension between them, long, simmering, began to shift, not through confrontation, but through understanding, reflection, and emotional truth. I was afraid, she admitted finally, voice barely above a whisper. Afraid that I'd lost you. Afraid that maybe I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. Ethan rose slowly, crossing the room with deliberate calm. He stopped a mere foot away, close enough to bridge the physical distance, yet leaving space for autonomy. Sophia, fear is part of love. It's part of intimacy. But awareness allows us to navigate it without letting it destroy what we care about. That's why I acted the way I did, not to punish you, but to awaken recognition, to show you what was at stake. Without resorting to anger or blame, her eyes glistened, reflecting the warm glow of the setting sun. She swallowed, her breath shallow, but steady. I see it now, and I want to try. I want to be present, truly present, not just for us, but for myself, too. Ethan nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of her commitment, yet he did not move closer. The balance of power, of agency, remained carefully maintained. This was not reconciliation through dramatics. It was the slow, deliberate rebuilding of trust, awareness, and mutual respect. I believe that's possible, he said quietly, voice calm but imbued with gravitas. It won't happen overnight. It will take time, patience, and mutual effort. But awareness is the first step. The rest will navigate together. Sophia exhaled, a soft release of tension, and for the first time in days, she felt a fragile sense of hope. She realized that true intimacy was not about constant proximity or unexamined gestures, but about understanding, presence, and the willingness to confront truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges pride. For Ethan, the conversation was a confirmation of strategy and patience. The climax of their conflict had not erupted in accusations or fury, but in clarity and reflection. By remaining calm, independent, and deliberate, he had guided both of them toward a space where vulnerability could exist, without chaos, and awareness could precede forgiveness. The room was silent save for the soft hum of the city beyond the windows. In that quiet, suspended moment, anger, sorrow, and tentative hope mingled, an intricate tapestry of human emotion, raw and real. Sophia had confronted her own choices. Ethan had maintained his composure and plan, and together, they began the delicate process of emotional reconciliation. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting amber hues across the apartment, both understood this was not an ending. It was a reckoning, a confrontation that had not destroyed them but awakened them. And in that awakening, there was the possibility of renewal, tempered by the lessons of trust, respect, and self-awareness. The city was quiet that evening, the usual hum of Manhattan, muted by a soft drizzle that made the streets glisten like liquid amber. Ethan sat by the window, glass of whiskey in hand, watching the reflections of the skyscrapers ripple across the rain-slick streets below. There was a stillness in the apartment, an almost sacred quiet, where the chaos of the previous weeks felt like a distant echo. Sophia moved around the room with tentative grace. Aware of the weight of the unspoken truce between them, the air was not entirely free of tension, but the sharp edges had softened. Each glance, each gesture, carried the imprint of careful negotiation, mutual awareness, and the subtle acknowledgement of lessons learned. The reconciliation had not been dramatic. There had been no grand gestures or sweeping declarations. Instead, it had been slow, deliberate, built through honest dialogue and a willingness to confront personal faults. Sophia had admitted to the emotional distance, the secret interactions, and the distractions that had pulled her away. Ethan had listened, not with judgment, but with clarity, emphasizing the need for awareness, respect, and presence. Over the past days, they had begun to navigate new rhythms. Shared meals were no longer just routines but moments of connection. Small windows of attention paid deliberately to one another. Conversations lingered longer. Eyes met with intention. And silences, once awkward and weighted, now felt like spaces for reflection rather than avoidance. Ethan observed Sophia as she arranged books on the shelf. Her movements careful, but unguarded. There was a vulnerability in the way she paused, fingertips grazing the spines of novels that had not been there before. He realized that the fractures in their relationship, though painful, had opened the possibility for deeper intimacy. True connection, he reflected, required both honesty and patience, the willingness to face uncomfortable truths while maintaining composure. Ethan, Sophia began softly, her voice threading through the room like a tentative melody. I know I have a lot to make up for, and I'm willing to try, fully. No shortcuts, no excuses. He turned slightly, meeting her gaze with calm intensity. Sophia, I never wanted to punish you. I wanted you to understand the weight of what we had, what we risked losing. Love, real love, is not just about passion or proximity, it's about awareness, respect, and the courage to confront reality together. She nodded, her eyes glistening with a mixture of humility and hope. I understand, and I want to rebuild that awareness with you, to be truly present, not just for us, but for myself too. Ethan smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of the tentative trust being restored. He took a sip of his whiskey, savoring the warmth, and watched the rain blur the city lights into streams of color. In that motion, he saw a metaphor for their relationship complex, layered, occasionally obscured, yet capable of brilliance when observed with patience and care. They began to redefine boundaries, not through imposed rules, but through shared understanding. Ethan recognized his own need for respect and autonomy, while Sophia acknowledged the importance of attentiveness and emotional reciprocity. It was a fragile balance, a tightrope walk daily, requiring vigilance and care. Yet it carried the promise of authenticity, depth, and mutual regard. Evenings became quieter, more intentional. They would sit together on the sofa, drinks in hand, exchanging stories of the day, reflections on subtle observations, and occasionally laughter that felt more profound than it had in months. There was a new rhythm to their interactions, one where emotional honesty coexisted with patience, where strategy did not overshadow affection, and where awareness deepened rather than diminished desire. Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey, the initial warnings of detachment, the subtle betrayals, the quiet recalibration of power, the private confrontation, and now, this delicate reconciliation. Each stage had been painful yet instructive, revealing the layers of human emotion, the interplay of pride and vulnerability, and the resilience required to navigate intimacy in a complex world. He glanced at Sophia as she leaned back in her chair, eyes tracing the city skyline beyond the window. There was a softness in her expression, a recognition of both past mistakes and the ongoing effort required to maintain trust. Ethan felt a swell of gratitude for the subtle, painstaking work of rebuilding connection. The rain eased, leaving the streets glimmering under the city lights. Ethan rose and moved to the window, resting his hands on the frame as he looked out over Manhattan. There was a sense of equilibrium now, fragile, but genuine. A balance achieved not through control or dominance, but through awareness, patience, and mutual effort. He thought about love in its truest form, complex, layered, requiring attention, patience, and courage. It was not always passionate or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, deliberate, and deeply introspective. And yet, it held the capacity for forgiveness, understanding, and profound connection. Sophia joined him by the window, their shoulders brushing lightly. A simple contact charged with significance. Words were unnecessary. The presence alone spoke volumes of acknowledgement, effort, and tentative hope. Ethan felt a deep sense of clarity, the realization that love, patience, and strategy could coexist with passion, désir, and the possibility of redemption. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe fully, the tension that had coiled within him easing into a quiet contentment. The city below continued its restless rhythm, oblivious to the intimate transformation occurring above, yet somehow echoing it complex, vibrant, unpredictable, yet endlessly alive. Ethan Carter understood, finally, that relationships were not static. They were evolving landscapes, shaped by choices, awareness, and the courage to confront truth without fear. In the delicate interplay of vulnerability, patience, and strategy, he had discovered a new dimension of love, one that could weather betrayal, embrace awareness, and emerge, tempered yet stronger. And as the night deepened, the city skyline shimmering in the distance, Ethan stood quietly, hand brushing the glass, heart calm, but awake. Beside him, Sophia's presence was a reminder that connection, though fragile, could be genuine, and that love complex, deliberate, and aware was worth every step of the journey.